Marcus Cole had been awake for 19 hours when his phone buzzed with a reminder he had not set himself. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Rosalind's on Maple. Don't cancel. Love you. Claire. He stared at the screen. Then he set the phone face down on the hospital break room table and went back to his coffee, which had gone cold an hour ago. He drank it anyway. Cold coffee was still coffee. He had learned not to waste things. He was 34 years old. He worked as a radiology technician at St. Brendan's Medical Center, which was a fancy name for a building that smelled like floor cleaner and low-grade anxiety. He had worked there for 6 years. He knew every hallway, every shortcut, every nurse who would share their lunch if you looked tired enough, and he always looked tired enough. Not because the work broke him. He was built for it, steady-handed and calm in the particular way that people who grew up in loud houses learn to be calm, but because the hours were long, and the world outside those hours had gradually become very small. His apartment had 2 rooms and a kitchen that was technically a 3rd room if you stood at a certain angle. He had a bookshelf full of books he had actually read, arranged in the order he had read them, because he had never seen the point of organizing things alphabetically when chronology told a better story. He had a plant on the kitchen windowsill with no name, because he felt it was not his place to name a living thing that had not asked for a name. He watered it every Sunday morning and occasionally spoke to it, not because he believed it listened, but because speaking out loud in a quiet apartment had a grounding quality he had come to rely on. He had a sister named Claire who loved him with a fierceness that occasionally expressed itself as interference, and who had never once in his memory been wrong about anything she had interfered in, which made the interference harder to resist. 3 days ago, Claire had told him about the blind date. She had not asked. She had arranged it entirely, texted him the name of the restaurant and the time, and the woman's first name, and then sent a follow-up message that said simply, "She is genuinely nice, I promise, just go." He had not canceled because he was not the kind of man who canceled things. He had learned early that showing up, even when you didn't want to, was a form of respect, for other people's time, for the effort they had made, for the possibility that something might be worth it even when you couldn't see the evidence yet. He had learned this from watching his mother. After his father left, when Marcus was 11, his mother Doris had gone to work and kept going to work, and still made dinner, and still came to everything. Every parent-teacher meeting, every uncomfortable school play, every Saturday morning when she would have rather stayed in bed. She did not have energy for grand gestures. She had only the energy for showing up, and she gave that energy completely and without complaint, and by the time he was a teenager, he understood that this was the most meaningful thing one person could give another person. He had exchanged 4 text messages with the woman. Her name was Dana Elliott. She worked in nursing, which Claire had described as healthcare, kind of like you, as though radiology and nursing were the same category of thing, which they were not at all, but he had let it go because Claire's heart was in the right place, which it always was, even when her precision was not. In those 4 messages, Dana had been straightforward and genuinely funny, not performing funny, not the kind of person who sends jokes to seem entertaining, but funny in the natural way of someone who is not trying. She had mentioned, offhandedly, that she had spent the previous Saturday reorganizing her linen closet and felt unreasonably proud of herself for it. He had replied that he had spent his Saturday watching a documentary about the history of the shipping container and felt equally and unreasonably proud. She had responded with one message, "We are going to get along fine." He had read that message twice. He had not asked himself why. The shift ended at 5:30, which gave him 90 minutes. He showered at the hospital, which he only did when time demanded it, and today it demanded it. He had a spare button-down in his locker. He always kept one there, a habit from the early years when he had learned that hospital work had a way of making you unfit for the rest of the world by midday. The shirt was navy blue. He had 3 identical ones at home. He had bought them because they fit correctly, and because making the same decision repeatedly was one less decision that needed making. He stood in front of the small mirror in the locker room and looked at himself honestly. He had a face that people called reliable-looking, which he understood was not the same thing as handsome but was also not nothing. He was tall and broad across the shoulders in a way that came from 6 years of moving equipment and patience, not from a gym. His hands were large and always steady. His hair needed a cut but had not yet crossed into embarrassing territory. He ironed the shirt in the break room with the travel iron someone had left in the supply cabinet years ago and that no one had ever claimed. He pressed each crease the same way he did everything, with full attention, unhurried, no part of him somewhere else. A nurse named Paulette walked past, observed him pressing a crease into his collar, and said, "Hot date?" without slowing down. "Blind date," he said. She said, "Oh, those are the scary ones," and kept walking. He thought about that for the rest of the ironing. He drove to Rosalind's. It was a restaurant that occupied the comfortable middle ground between casual and formal. Cloth napkins without a dress code, candles without a sommelier. He had found it online, had read 14 reviews, had noted the parking availability, and had specifically requested the corner table near the window, because 2 of the reviews mentioned it as the best seat in the room. He was this kind of person. He prepared for things he wanted to go well. It was not anxiety. Anxiety was something else, something he recognized but did not particularly suffer from. It was simply care, expressed through preparation, which was the only way he knew how to care about things. He arrived 7 minutes early, which was his standard. He gave his name to the host, a young man with good posture, and was led to the corner table near the window, the one he had asked for. He sat down, ordered water, and did not touch his phone. The restaurant was about 2/3 full. There was a couple to his left with the relaxed, quiet happiness of people who had been celebrating things together long enough to stop making a production of it. There was a group of 4 near the bar whose laughter kept resurfacing, the way good stories do on the second and third telling. There was a woman near the window reading a novel with the complete commitment of someone who had made a deliberate choice to be here and nowhere else. He respected that greatly. He read the menu twice, even though he had already decided on the salmon. At 7-Eleven, the door opened. He knew it was her before she reached the host stand. Not from a photo. He had only seen one, and it was not the kind of photo that prepares you for the actual person, but from the way she entered. She came in moving quickly and then pulling herself to a stop, the way people do when they have been rushing and must now be somewhere that requires stillness. She was in teal-colored scrubs, not the fresh beginning of shift kind, the kind that had lived a full day and showed it. There was a lanyard around her neck with a badge that caught the warm restaurant light. Her hair was pulled back in a way that had started the morning with intention and had held on through the hours through sheer stubbornness. She scanned the room with the practiced eyes of someone who had spent years scanning rooms for things that needed immediate attention, and when she found him at the corner table, something in her face shifted. Not quite relief, not quite dread. Something honest and unguarded in the space between those 2 things. She walked toward him. He watched her cross the restaurant and noticed, before he noticed anything else, that she was entirely present, not managing her arrival, not adjusting how she appeared, just coming in exactly as she was, and whatever had happened to get her here was visible on her face, and she was not hiding any of it. She stopped at the table. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected from the texts, direct. "I wore my work uniform." She said it to the table between them. She said it the way people say things they have been rehearsing in the car, where the words have accumulated more weight than they were designed to carry. "I had a double shift and it ran over, and I only had 40 minutes to get here, and I didn't make it home, and I know this is—" She stopped, breathed. "I know this is not how first dates are supposed to go." The couple to his left had gone quiet, not intrusively, just the way people go quiet when something real is happening close by, and they are not sure which way to look. The host had paused somewhere behind her. A server stood with a tray, caught between roots. She had not sat down. She was still standing, and she was giving him the clean, explicit option of an exit, the kind you offer someone when you have already decided you are the kind of person who will be left. He looked at her. He stood up. Not quickly, not with the uncertain half-rise of a man who is not sure what the situation calls for. He stood with the particular calm of someone who has already decided what he is doing. He pulled out her chair. "I still want this date," he said. 5 words, said without flourish, without performed warmth, without the upward lilt that would have turned them into a question. Said the way you say something true. Said the way you would say the results came back clear, factual and complete, carrying everything it needed to carry without additional weight. The restaurant held its breath for exactly 1 second. Then the couple to the left exhaled quietly. The host smiled at nothing in particular. The server with the tray made a small, involuntary sound of approval and resumed her route. Someone at the bar raised a glass in a direction that was not quite anywhere specific. Dana stood at the chair he had pulled out and looked at him the way people look at something they had not prepared to receive and do not yet know what to do with. She sat down. Her lanyard caught on the arm of the chair. She reached to free it, and her fingers, usually efficient from years of quick, accurate work, took a moment longer than they needed. She left the lanyard where it was. "Thank you," she said. Not for the chair, not for the 5 words specifically. For something larger than either of those things, something she did not name because she understood, without needing to say it, that he already knew what it was. He sat back down across from her. He picked up the menu he had already read 4 times. She picked up hers. They sat in a silence that was not awkward, a silence that was, in fact, its own kind of remarkable thing. 2 strangers at a restaurant table, one in work scrubs, one holding a menu he had no intention of using, sitting in a quiet that neither of them felt any urgency to fill. Outside, November did what November does: cold, honest, no warmth left in the air to pretend. Inside, the candle between them threw steady light in both directions. "Okay," Dana said. She set down the menu. "Honest question." "Go ahead," he said. "Were you tempted, even a little?" He thought about it the way he thought about all questions, actually, fully, before answering. "For about 3 seconds," he said, "when I saw you scanning the room." "What happened after 3 seconds?" "You looked at me," he said simply, "and I stopped being tempted." She was quiet for a moment. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me, while I was standing in scrubs at a restaurant. "It's not that fancy a restaurant," he said. She looked at the cloth napkins, the candles, the careful low lighting. "It is a little fancy," she said. "A little," he agreed. The server came. They ordered. The evening had officially begun, not with the smooth, prepared version either of them might have imagined on a better day, but with something better than that, the unguarded version, the one that did not have time to rehearse itself, the one that arrived exactly as it was and was still asked to stay. Dana Elliott had spent her entire adult life being 2 things at once, genuinely capable and persistently certain she was about to be found out. It was not something she discussed or brought into rooms. It lived in the background of everything, a low, continuous hum beneath the confidence that patients saw when she walked in, beneath the steadiness her colleagues counted on at 3 in the morning when 3 things were going wrong at once, beneath the easy laugh that people always mentioned when they described her. It was the thing that made her prepare twice as hard for things she was already fully prepared for. It was the thing that made her apologize preemptively, before anyone had expressed disappointment. It was the thing that had her standing at a restaurant table in teal scrubs, offering a stranger an exit, before he had given the faintest indication he wanted one. She was 31 years old. She had been a nurse for 6 years, the last 3 of them in the cardiac step-down unit at Mercy General, a different department, and a fundamentally different variety of tired from the emergency department where she had started her career. She had moved to cardiac because she wanted the longer relationship with patients. Emergency nursing was fast and essential, and she had been good at it, but she kept wanting to know what happened after the crisis passed. In emergency, you stabilized someone, and they were taken somewhere else, and you usually never found out. Cardiac let her know. She was very good at what she did. This was not arrogance. It was an accurate assessment that her supervisors confirmed regularly, and that her patients expressed in the particular way patients express gratitude, by asking for her specifically, by remembering her name months later in follow-up calls, by leaving notes at the nurses' station in handwriting that cost them effort. She knew she was good, and the knowing still did not stop the hum, which was perhaps the most honest thing she could have told anyone about herself, and which she almost never told anyone. She had grown up in Central Ohio. Her father, Garrett, fixed trucks for a living, and had a laugh that started in his chest, and arrived a full second before his face caught up with it. He had loved her with the large, uncomplicated love of a man who showed love through presence. He came to everything, every game and every play and every awards assembly, sat in gymnasium bleachers in uncomfortable folding chairs with the same focused attention he gave to everything that mattered, and he never once in her childhood missed something she needed him at. He did not effusively praise her. He was simply there, reliably and entirely, which she understood more with each year of adulthood that passed, and showed her how many people had not had even that. Her mother, Louise, taught 4th grade, and graded papers at the kitchen table every Sunday evening of Dana's childhood. Louise loved her with equal completeness and a more complicated delivery. She was the kind of mother who asked follow-up questions to her follow-up questions, who wanted to understand not just what had happened, but your theory of why it had happened and what you thought about that theory. It was thorough. It was occasionally exhausting. It meant Dana had grown up with an unusually specific knowledge of herself, her patterns and her fears, and the exact texture of both her confidence and her doubt. And yet this self-knowledge had never quite hardened into armor. She wore it more like a map of all the places she could still get lost. She had been in one long relationship with a man named Paul, which had lasted 4 years. It had not ended badly. It had ended in a conversation at a kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday, both of them finally saying what had been true for longer than either of them wanted to admit. They were good together, and they loved each other, and they wanted completely different things from their lives, which they had both understood for at least a year, and had both been too fond of each other to say. The end of it had been sad in the particular way of something that was nobody's fault and still felt like a failure, the particular sadness of letting go not because anything broke, but because holding on would have broken both of them eventually. That had been 2 years ago. Since then, she had dated occasionally and carefully, with the specific caution of someone who has learned that chemistry is one thing, and compatibility is the thing you actually have to live inside. 5 first dates in 2 years, 2 second dates, no third dates. Not because the men were unkind, they were not, but because she had become so practiced at reading people quickly from her work that she could not turn it off in her personal life, and knowing someone's patterns too soon made it impossible to be surprised by them. She had come to understand, without quite articulating it, that what she was actually looking for was someone who could still surprise her. Then Claire Cole had appeared in a building group chat. Claire lived 4 doors down from Dana's apartment on Grover Street. They had been neighbors for 3 years without meeting, which was completely possible in the way it is possible in apartment buildings where people keep their doors closed and their schedules different, and the building chat exists mainly for package theft warnings and arguments about parking. Claire had posted looking for an honest electrician. Dana had a recommendation. Claire had sent a direct message, and somehow in the weeks that followed, they had discovered that they were interesting to each other in the way that genuinely compatible people are. Not immediately obvious, not electric, but the quiet, deepening interest of 2 people who ask better questions the more they talk. They had started meeting for Sunday morning coffee. Claire talked with her hands and had strong opinions about everything, and was completely willing to be wrong when the evidence required it, which was rare and which Dana found refreshing. She asked good questions and actually processed the answers, which was rarer still. About 2 months into the Sunday routine, Claire had said, with the directness of someone who had been sitting on something and had decided the sitting was done, "I want to set you up with my brother." Dana had put down her cup. "Tell me about him." "He's quiet," Claire said. "Not the unfriendly kind, the thoughtful kind. He works in radiology. He is the most reliable person I have ever been around, and I have known him my entire life, which means something. He irons his own clothes and he watches documentaries about things like canals and infrastructure, and he has never sent me a meme that wasn't actually funny, which is a higher bar than it sounds." "Those are very specific qualities," Dana said. "He's a specific person," Claire said. "He also hasn't been on a date in over a year, not because anything is wrong with him, because he works too much, and because he is the kind of person who simply does not do things unless he thinks they are worth doing. He hasn't met anyone who made him think it would be worth it." "And you think I would?" Claire looked at her directly, the way she looked at everything that mattered. "I think you would genuinely surprise him," she said. "And I don't think that happens to him often," Dana had agreed. Not from the impulse of wanting a love story. She had learned to be skeptical of those impulses. She agreed, because the description was specific and interesting. A person who doesn't show up unless he means to. After 2 years of people who went through the motions, who showed up because showing up was expected, and then waited to be convinced to stay, the idea of someone who simply would not come at all if he didn't intend to be there was, quietly, exactly what she had been looking for, without quite knowing she was looking. The 4 text messages had exceeded her expectations. His humor was dry and genuine. The shipping container reply had made her laugh out loud alone in her kitchen, which she considered the true standard for funny. Not assisted by company or context, just the thing itself landing. She had been genuinely excited about the date. She had picked out the dress 2 days in advance, a green one that her colleague and close friend Petra had once told her was a good color, worn with the simple intent of arriving as the best and most put-together version of herself. She had structured her schedule so that her shift ended at 3 in the afternoon, and she had 4 full hours to go home and shower and change, and arrive feeling like herself, rather than like the version of herself that belonged to the hospital. The shift before hers called in sick at noon. The backup called in a family emergency at 2. Dana looked at the board, looked at her charge nurse, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The floor needed her and she was there, and that was simply what happened when you were the person who always stayed. She texted Marcus at 4:30, running into overtime tonight, still planning to be there. If I'm more than 30 minutes late, please start without me. He replied, I'll be there. 2 words, no alternative offer, no gentle suggestion to reschedule, just, I'll be there. She had thought about those 2 words at intervals through the rest of the shift, thought about them between tasks that required her complete attention, and gave those tasks her complete attention, and thought about the 2 words again in the gaps. She finished at 6:40. She did not have time to go home. She pulled off her outer layer in the locker room and found that the scrub top underneath had a bleach stain near the left pocket from an accident 3 hours ago that she had forgotten in the rush of the next thing and the thing after that. She stood looking at the stain for 10 seconds and made the only honest decision available. She was going, or she was not. She was going. She drove with the windows cracked because the cold air was the thing that kept her sharp, and because she needed something to do with the nervous part of herself that had nothing practical to direct its energy toward. She parked and sat in the car for exactly 45 seconds. She checked her hair in the visor mirror, holding, reasonably. She used mascara from her bag. She straightened the lanyard, and then felt immediately foolish for doing it, because no amount of straightening a lanyard was going to solve what the lanyard represented, which was simply that she was a nurse, arriving at a restaurant, still visibly a nurse. She got out of the car. She pushed through the door of Rosalind's. The warmth of the restaurant met her like a hand placed steadily on her shoulder. She scanned the room, years of scanning rooms for things that needed immediate attention, and found the corner table, and the man sitting at it who was not on his phone, was not checking the door every 30 seconds, was not performing patience or signaling impatience. He was simply sitting there, waiting, with the uncomplicated calm of someone who has decided where he is and is comfortable being there. She walked toward him. With every step across the restaurant floor, she felt the full weight of what she was walking in as, not just the scrubs. The whole of it, the day that had asked everything, the outfit she had not gotten to wear, the version of the evening she had planned, and the version she was actually delivering. She made a decision she would not have been able to name until years later when she was telling this story. She decided not to manage it. She stopped at the table. She let it be exactly what it was. Her, exactly as she was, in every way she had not chosen tonight. And she told the truth, which was that she was sorry, and she gave him the exit, which was the honest thing to do. And then he stood up and pulled out her chair and said 5 words that rearranged something behind her ribs so quietly and completely that she did not understand until much later how permanent the rearrangement was. She sat down. The lanyard caught on the arm of the chair and she freed it slowly, her fingers taking their time with something simple, and she left the lanyard where it ended up and looked at the man across the table and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she did not need to apologize for where she was. The salmon arrived and Marcus looked at it for precisely the time it took to confirm it was what he had ordered, and then he looked back at Dana. People who knew him well had noted this, the speed and completeness with which he redirected his attention, as though his focus were a finite resource he allocated deliberately, rather than scattered. His sister Claire had told him once, when you're listening to someone, they feel like the only person in the building. She said it as a compliment, and he received it as one, but it was also simply accurate. He did not divide himself between what was in front of him and everything else. If he was at the table, he was at the table. The restaurant sounds, the couple celebrating quietly to his left, the ambient warmth of a busy room on a November evening. These were real, but they were background. Dana was not background. She was talking about the patient she had stayed late for. She was not narrating it for effect, not constructing a story to tell him, just describing what had happened, directly and efficiently, the way she described everything, and the care in it was audible in what she chose to include. The patient's exact age, the small pause before she described the family in the corridor, the exhale at the end when she said the shift had finally handed off. How long have you been in cardiac? He asked. 3 years. I started in emergency. She folded and refolded the edge of her napkin without noticing she was doing it. I liked emergency. The pace of it. The thinking fast quality. But I kept wanting to know what happened after. In emergency, you stabilize someone and they go somewhere else, and the story just stops. You want the complete story, he said. She looked at him with the open, unguarded expression of someone who has been understood accurately, in a way they didn't expect. Yes, she said. That's exactly it. I like the complete image, he said. That's what radiology is. You see everything that's happening inside. You hand the image to the doctors, and they make the call based on what you found. I think about that. Whether what I caught that day made a difference. Does it? Make a difference? Sometimes you find out, he said. More often you don't. She nodded slowly. The not finding out is hard. It gets easier, he said. Not easy. Easier. There's a distinction. She tilted her head, looking at him with the specific attention she gave to things she was actually examining, rather than things she was simply looking at. You seem like someone who figured out very early how to carry things without putting them down. He considered the question, genuinely, not performing consideration, in the particular way he had that she had already begun to notice and to stop filling. You learn which things need holding and which can be set down, he said. Takes a while to tell the difference. What taught you? My father left when I was 11, he said. My mother worked 2 jobs. I was the older one. You learn fast what you can afford to carry. He said it simply, not with the weight people sometimes use when revealing difficult things, the weight that announces its own arrival, that invites the listener to respond to the difficulty rather than to the person. He was not asking for anything in return. He was answering her question with the most accurate and compact true thing he could say, and then he picked up his fork and cut into the salmon, and the moment moved forward. She did not rush in to cover it with sympathy. She did not say she was sorry in the reflexive way people do when they don't know what else to do. She received it without decoration. I have the opposite problem, she said, after a moment that was the right length. I set things down, and then pick them up again to examine them, and forget to put them down. I carry them around examining them. What kinds of things? Conversations. Choices I made, whether I did something right, whether a person I saw today is okay. She met his eyes steadily. I am good at my job, and I have never once in 6 years gone home without wondering if I should have done something differently. That's not a flaw, he said. No, she agreed. It lives very close to one, though. He looked at her across the small table. She was something, he thought, not as a performed observation, but as a quiet, accumulating fact. Not just interesting to look at, though that was also true, in the way that becomes more apparent the longer you look. She was interesting to be with in the specific way he had stopped expecting to find, the way she held confidence and uncertainty in the same sentence, the way her directness was softened, not by hesitation, but by genuine thought, the way she said true things, and then immediately examined them, as if making sure they were still true. You mentioned an outfit you had planned, he said. She gave him the mild, sideways look of someone not sure where he was going. The green dress, yes. What made you still come? Without it. The restaurant moved around them. Soft music, lowered voices, the sound of an evening in progress. She was quiet for a moment, and he waited the way he had learned to wait, without filling the space, without hinting that he needed the pause to end. You said I'll be there, she said finally, when I texted you that I was running late. Just that, no question, no alternative, no suggestion that we could find another night. She paused. I thought, if I don't show up, then the only version of tonight that ever exists is the one where I didn't. And I didn't want that to be the version. He held that. The candle between them had burned a centimeter lower. I read 14 reviews of this restaurant, he said. She blinked. 14. I noted the parking situation. I requested this specific table. He looked at her calmly. I knew what I was ordering before I arrived. You researched the restaurant. I prepare for things I want to go well, he said, as though this were the most obvious thing in the world. I wanted this evening to go well. She started to smile. Slowly, from one side. The genuine kind that takes its time arriving. That is either the most thorough or the most romantic thing I've ever heard someone admit to, and I can't decide which. Probably both, he said. She laughed. The real one, the voice note one, catching itself mid-breath. And up close, it was better than he had prepared for. He had not laughed much in the past year, not because anything was wrong with his life, but because his days were professionally quiet, moving between rooms and patients and images, speaking when speaking was required, and being still when it wasn't. The life he had built was good. It had structure and meaning, and people in it he trusted. It was only in certain moments, usually late, lying in the dark, that he recognized a difference between a life that worked and a life that was alive. He had not named what was missing, because naming things you don't have is a particular kind of self-indulgence he had always avoided. He was naming it now, without saying it out loud, sitting across from Dana. She told him about a patient who had changed the way she thought about the entire enterprise of her work, an older man named George who, after a particularly long and difficult night, had held her hand and said quietly, "You're going to be fine, sweetheart, and so am I," and who had been discharged the following week. She told it as a small story, not a grand one, with the particular brevity of someone who understands that the most true things do not need inflation. He listened the way he listened to everything. "Tell me about Claire," she said. He raised one eyebrow. "Matchmakers usually prefer to operate from a distance." "Claire is not at a distance from anything," Dana said with complete certainty. "She is at the front of every room, adjusting the lighting." "That is extremely accurate," he said. "How well do you actually know her?" 2 months of Sunday coffee. She talks about you more than she realizes." "What does she say?" "That you're steady. That you show up without making a production of showing up. That you drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to help a friend move out of a bad situation, stayed until it was done, then drove back and went to work the next morning." He said nothing. "Is it true?" "The friend needed to go," he said, simply. That was the whole of the explanation. She looked at him across the table with the complete, unhurried attention she normally gave only to the quiet moments at work, the spaces between the urgent things, when a patient was simply a person and not a case number, and thought, "This is what it looks like when someone does the right thing without needing anyone to witness it." The thought was large enough to require a moment. She looked at her pasta. "Your food is cold," she said. "So is yours," he said. They ate. The conversation moved the way good conversations do, easily, between subjects, without effort on either side. His Canal documentary, her Pause Button podcast, the particular comedy of two people who had arrived with contingency plans for the evening, both of which had become completely irrelevant. The restaurant thinned around them without their noticing. "We've been here 2.5 hours, she said eventually, looking around at the changed room. "Yes," he said. "I didn't notice." "Neither did I." The server brought the check quietly. Marcus paid without discussion. She tipped with the deliberate generosity of someone who understood that hospitality was real labor, and that real labor deserved to be acknowledged. She pulled on her coat. She removed the lanyard and put it in her pocket, and something in the line of her shoulders shifted slightly. Lighter, the way a person shifts when they set down something they had forgotten they were carrying. He held the door. She walked through it. The November cold arrived without apology. They stood on the sidewalk outside Rosalind's, their cars in opposite directions, neither of them moving toward a car. "I almost canceled," she said. "I know," he said. She turned to look at him. "How?" "Because I thought about it for 20 minutes after my shift," he said. "Told myself it was too late in the day to be good company. That first dates are mostly just interviews for something that may not happen." A pause. "And then I thought, if not this, then what? Another quiet evening, another shift, another documentary watched alone." She looked at him under the yellow streetlight, in the cold. "And?" she said. He looked back at her, in the teal scrubs under the gray coat, with the lanyard now in her pocket, and the day still visible on her face, and the laugh that caught itself mid-breath still somewhere in the air between them. "Found out," he said. She reached into her pocket and held her phone out to him. "Put your number in. You already have mine. Put it in anyway." He took the phone. He added his number. He handed it back. She looked at the screen, then at him. "Text me," she said. He nodded. She walked to her car without looking back. He stood until the door closed and the engine turned over and the lights came on. He walked to his own car, sat for a moment in the dark. He picked up his phone. "Same time next week," he typed, paused, then added, "Where whatever." He sent it. He put the car in reverse and left. In her car 4 blocks away, Dana Elliott sat with her phone in both hands in the dark and read the message and felt the particular fullness of someone who had arrived, carrying everything she had not planned to arrive with and had been asked to stay anyway. She sat with it for exactly the time it deserved. Then she put the car in drive and went home through the cold November city, the heater on, the radio quiet, the smile on her face belonging to no one but herself. Marcus was not the kind of man who measured time by the clock on the wall. He measured it by what had changed. In the week between the Thursday at Rosalind's and the following Thursday, which neither of them had officially named a second date, but which both of them understood was one, something in him had changed, not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to anyone who did not know him well, but Claire noticed, and Claire noticing was the closest thing to a public announcement that he allowed. What had changed was the direction of his attention in the quiet spaces, during the 20 minutes between patients at work, during the drive home, during the hour before sleep when he usually read, and now occasionally lay looking at the ceiling instead. In those spaces, his attention went somewhere specific without his instruction, to Dana, not to a projected version of her, not to the idea of something possible, to the actual, recalled, specific version. The way she had said, "We're a pair," with the slight self-aware tilt that softened it without removing any warmth from it. The way she had received the information about his father, not as something requiring careful handling but with the same direct steadiness with which she handled everything, which was exactly what he had needed and had not known to expect. The laugh. He kept returning to the laugh. He texted her on Friday afternoon. She replied within the hour. Not immediately, because she was at work, and she was entirely at work when she was at work, but at the first reasonable pause, which told him she had checked her phone at the earliest moment she could, and replied at it. He read into this exactly what it deserved. She had thought about replying and decided yes, that was a real and complete thing. They texted every day that week. Short, unhurried exchanges. Nothing that required a reply but always receiving one. He told her he had started a documentary about the construction of the Panama Canal. She told him about a patient who had been in the unit for 3 weeks and had begun requesting specific songs, which Dana had quietly begun providing through her phone speaker during the slower parts of the shift. He asked what songs.
Songs,
She told him. He knew none of them. "You give me a canal documentary," she wrote. "I'll give you Glenn Miller." "Deal," he replied. He listened to Glenn Miller on Sunday evening with his kitchen window open a few inches. Too cold for it, technically, but November had given them one marginally warmer afternoon, and he had taken it. He did not mention this to her. Some things were more satisfying for being unannounced. He told Claire about the date on Saturday morning, by phone, because her face when she was right about something was genuinely hard to look at without laughing, and he didn't want to give her the satisfaction of the laugh immediately. "So?" Claire said. "It was good," he said. Silence. Then, "Marcus." "Very good," he said. She wore her scrubs. Claire knew because Dana had texted her from the parking lot, which Marcus had suspected. She did. She apologized. She offered me a clear way out. "Oh no," Claire said. I told her I still wanted the date. A pause long enough to hear her composing herself. Then, "Marcus Cole." "Don't. I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting here being correct." "You're often correct," he said. "It doesn't need to be announced." "Second date?" "Thursday." "Where?" "Somewhere she doesn't have to dress for," he said. Another sound from Claire. "I love you very much," she said. "I know," he said. "Thank you for this. Actually, I just introduced 2 people," she said. "You did everything else." "She did everything else," he said. She walked in. "In scrubs," Claire said. "In scrubs," he agreed. "That's harder than it looks." He had thought about this in the days following. The specific texture of showing up in its most literal form, choosing to walk through a restaurant door after a day that had taken everything you had, without the preparations you had made, in the clothes of your labor rather than the clothes of your intention. He understood the mechanics of it from a different angle. He had done it in other contexts, in other years. He had learned that showing up was rarely the small thing it appeared to be, and was almost always the largest thing. He picked her up for the second date. He had sent the address 3 days ahead, a restaurant he had found after reading 17 reviews, one more than last time, an improvement he was privately satisfied with. And she had replied, "You researched again, didn't you?" Not a question. 20% more thoroughly than last time, he replied. That is either personal growth or a warning sign. Probably both. When she opened her apartment door in 30 seconds flat, a time that indicated she had been ready, she was wearing the green dress. He recognized it without having seen it, because she had described it as the thing she had planned to wear and had not been able to. She saw him register it. The green, she said. The green, he confirmed. The small private smile arrived on her face, not the public one, the one that didn't need anyone watching. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked down to the car in the November cold, unhurried. The second dinner was different from the first. The first had the quality of discovery, the specific surprise of finding something possible. The second had the quality of two people deciding what to do about something possible now that they had found it. She told him about the year after Paul, not the summary version, the real one, the month she had barely left her apartment, the 2 in the morning moments on the bathroom floor, not because anything had broken, but because the accumulated smallness of everything had become physical weight, and the bathroom tile was cold and solid and real. The call to her mother at 3, Louise answering on the second ring because Louise always answered, saying nothing that fixed anything but staying on the line for 40 minutes, which was the only thing that needed to happen. He did not manage what she said, he received it. When she finished, he said, "The bathroom floor thing. I know that one." She looked at him. "Different floor," he said. "Different year. Same idea." She did not ask which floor. She understood that he was doing what she had done, offering the compressed, true version without inflation. She received it the way he had offered it. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," he said. The conversation moved forward, the way it does when something has been properly received and no longer needs to wait in the room. Walking back to his car after dinner, she put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around hers. No comment. No marking of the moment. They walked through the cold and the December approaching dark, and a bakery window glowed amber ahead of them, and the warmth reached them briefly as they passed, and then the cold was back, and they kept walking. For the third date, 9 days later, he texted on a Wednesday, "Tomorrow, I'll pick you up at 6. Dress for cold." He had spent 40 minutes researching, and one conversation with a parking garage security guard named Owen, whom he had encountered twice before in unrelated circumstances, to confirm that the rooftop of the garage adjacent to the downtown art museum was accessible on weekday evenings, and offered a view of the city that the majority of the city's residents had no knowledge of. She stood at the concrete barrier on that rooftop and looked at the river and the lights and the dark, uneven cut of the skyline for a long time without speaking. He stood beside her and let her look. "How did you find this?" she said finally. "I was looking for something that would surprise you," he said. She turned. "Why?" "Because you told Claire you were looking for someone who could still surprise you," he said. She mentioned it in passing. "I remember things people mention in passing." She stared at him. "You remembered that specifically?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The city lights made everything around them simultaneous, soft and specific, distant and near. The cold was absolute. "Marcus," she said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "I've spent 2 years being very careful about who I let in," she said, "because the last time I built something real with someone and then had to let it go, the letting go was the hardest thing I'd done. And I told myself I wouldn't do that again without being more certain first." She paused. "I'm not certain yet. It's 3 dates." "No," he agreed. "But I want to keep going," she said. "And I want to say that out loud, because last time I didn't say what was true until too long after it was true, and things became murky when they didn't need to be." He looked at the city, then at her. "I've wanted to keep going," he said, "since the moment you sat down in the scrubs and picked up the menu and didn't read it for 30 seconds. You noticed that." "I noticed things," he said. The wind moved between them, cold and indifferent to everything happening inside it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood on the rooftop in the November dark, and the thing between them, unnamed still, unclaimed, but visible now from the right angle, in the right light, held steady against the wind. He drove her home. He walked her to her door. She turned with the key in her hand and looked at him. "You researched the roof," she said. 40 minutes, he said, and a conversation with a parking garage security guard. She looked at him for a long, honest moment. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her cheek, close to the corner of her mouth, deliberate and unhurried, and leaving the rest of it for when the time was fully right. She put one hand briefly against his chest. Then she went inside. He walked back to his car in the November night and drove home through the quiet streets and sat in his parked car for a moment before going upstairs. He thought about what the evening had been. He thought about the word she had used, certain, and understood that he was, and that the patience required to wait for her to find her own way there was not a sacrifice, but a straightforward thing, like watering a plant on Sunday, like driving 4 hours in the dark for a friend, something you do because it is the obvious right thing to do, and not for any other reason. He went upstairs. He watered the plant, even though it was not Sunday. He read 5 pages of his book and could not have told you what they said. He lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, and slept well for the first time in a long while. Winter arrived without asking and settled over the city one cold layer at a time, the way it always did, until one morning you stepped outside and understood that this was simply the world now, and there was no useful argument to be made against it. Dana did not argue with it. She found her thermal underlayers. She bought a second heavy blanket. She reorganized her coat closet with the competence of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that the world's conditions were beyond her management, and her response to those conditions was not. This was, she had come to understand over 2.5 months of Thursdays, something she shared with Marcus Cole. They had claimed Thursday the way certain people claim a particular chair, not by announcement but by repetition, until the claiming was simply a fact. And alongside the Thursdays had grown a daily exchange of messages that moved at the easy rhythm of 2 people who had found a frequency that suited them both, without discussion or negotiation. He texted when he had something to say. She replied when she could. Neither of them performed availability. Neither of them manufactured urgency. It was the most honest communication pattern she had ever been inside, and she had not understood, until it was already operating, how much she had wanted exactly this. She had been to his apartment twice. The first time was the Sunday he had cooked, a proper meal, prepared with full attention and without the need to narrate it or be praised for it, which she found quietly extraordinary. She had looked around his apartment the way you look at a new kind of text, trying to read the grammar of it, the books organized by the order he had read them, the plant with no name on the windowsill, the 3 identical blue button-downs in the open closet, the travel iron above the washing machine, the window looking out onto the park 2 blocks away, where 2 old men played chess on a bench regardless of weather. A detail he mentioned with the warm, fond tone of someone who has observed something long enough to feel affection for its reliability. She had picked a book from his shelf, a novel about a lighthouse keeper, and he had said from the kitchen, without looking up, "That one's the best." She had read 30 pages at his kitchen table, while he finished cooking, and neither of them commented on this, and neither of them felt any need to. "You took the book," he said when she was leaving. "I'll bring it back," she said. "Keep it," he said. She was on chapter 16 now, reading it on her lunch breaks in the nurse's break room with a cup of coffee, and the particular pleasure of a book that earns its reputation. It was, as advertised, the best. She had told Petra she was seeing someone. Petra had put down her pen and looked at her for a full second and said simply, "Good." "That's it?" Dana said. "You look like someone who's being taken care of," Petra said. "And I know you're capable of taking care of yourself, and I also know that's not the point. So, good." Dana had not known what to do with this, so she said thank you, and went back to work, and thought about it intermittently, for the rest of the shift, in the way you think about things that are exactly right. She mentioned it to Marcus on Thursday. He was quiet in the specific way he was quiet when he was actually thinking rather than simply pausing, and then he said, "Being taken care of and being capable aren't opposites." "I know that," she said, intellectually. "And now?" She looked at him, working on the rest. "Good enough?" he said. It was on the 4th Thursday of December, 7 weeks after Rosalind's, that the evening moved into territory neither of them had planned for. They were at a small cafe downtown that she had mentioned once in passing and which he had, characteristically, remembered and returned to now. They had been there 2 hours. The conversation had been the well-traveled kind, moving between subjects with the ease of people who had been talking long enough to trust the terrain. And then she said something she had not planned to say. Not about him, about herself. About the year after Paul, not the version with the edges smoothed into something presentable, but the true version, the one she had not yet given him, the month she had barely left her apartment, the 2 in the morning bathroom floor, cold tile against her palms, not because anything had broken, but because the accumulated smallness of everything had become a physical weight, and the floor was at least solid and real. The call to her mother, Louise answering on the second ring, because Louise always answered, saying nothing useful but staying on the line for 40 minutes, which was the only thing that needed to happen. She did not know why she said it this way, this time. It arrived because it was true, and because she was, for the first time she could honestly recall, in the presence of someone she trusted to hold it without doing anything elaborate with it. She watched his face while she said it. He did not look for the right response. He simply looked at her. "The bathroom floor thing," he said when she finished. "I know that one." She looked at him. "Different floor," he said. "Different year. Same idea." She did not ask for more. She understood what he was doing, offering the true and compressed version, which cost something to say, and which he was saying without inflation or expectation of return. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," he said. The conversation moved forward. That was the right thing for it to do, and it did it. Walking back to the car, she put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around hers. They walked through the December cold, and the bakery on the block ahead was warm and yellow from inside, and the warmth reached them as they passed, and then the cold was back, and they kept walking, hand in hand, saying nothing, because nothing needed saying. He drove her home. He turned off the engine in front of her building. The heater ran. The windows began to fog at the edges. "I want to say something," he said. "Okay," she said. "Weeks ago on the roof, you said you weren't certain yet," he said. "I've been patient, not because I was waiting for you to arrive somewhere, but because I didn't want to put something in the room before the room was ready for it." He looked at her directly, with the full and unhurried attention that was simply how he looked at everything that mattered. "I think the room is ready." Her breathing had become quieter. "I'm not asking for a declaration," he said. "I'm not in a hurry. I just want you to know what I'm doing here. I am here because of you. Not because it's Thursday. Not because Claire arranged something and I showed up. Because of you, specifically." I wanted to say that out loud. The heater hummed. Outside, December went about its business. She looked at him. She looked at this face she had been learning, steady, direct, uncomplicated in the way that only very deep things manage to be. And she watched something she had been carrying quietly begin to come loose from its moorings, not because it was breaking, but because it no longer needed to be held that tightly. "I know," she said, and then, "I'm here because of you too." He nodded. Once, certain. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not the cheek. That was 2 months, and many Thursdays behind them. This was now, and she was a person who moved when the time was right, and the time was absolutely right. He kissed her back with the complete, unhurried attention he brought to everything. When they separated, the windows were fully fogged. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she agreed. She got out, did not look back, because she committed to her exits. He waited until the building door had closed, then sat in the car for a moment longer. Then he drove home through the December city, cold, bright, moving, entirely itself, and arrived at his apartment, and went upstairs, and stood in his kitchen for a moment. He was smiling, the quiet kind, the kind that had no audience. January arrived, and with it the particular clarity that comes after the noise of the holidays has receded, and the world is cold, and still, and honest. Dana understood something in January. Not because of an event or a conversation. Because she had arrived at work on an ordinary Monday morning after a quiet Sunday at Marcus's apartment. They had spent the afternoon in the same room, her reading and him watching something about infrastructure, the silence between them the comfortable kind that has stopped needing to be filled, and she had hung up her coat and clipped on her lanyard and walked to the nurse's station and said to Petra, without build-up, "I think I love him." Petra set down her pen. "I think I've loved him for a while," Dana said. "I just hadn't said it in the right order yet." Petra was quiet for a moment. "Tell him." "I know." "Soon," Petra said. "Not today," Dana said, "but soon." It took 11 days, not because she was afraid of the words. She was not. She was direct by nature, and had learned that directness was almost always the fastest, honest path. but because she wanted to say it in a moment that was already itself, not constructed, not weighted with ceremony, just right, the way true things are right when they arrive in the right space. She found the moment on a Thursday, which was where she had found everything. They were in his kitchen. She had brought groceries. He was at the counter chopping something with the focus he gave to everything, including, she had discovered, especially vegetables, which she had teased him about, and which he had defended with the utterly reasonable position that even small tasks deserve care. She was at the kitchen table with the Lighthouse Keeper novel, rereading it now from the beginning, which was how she knew beyond any doubt that it was the best. Not that she had finished it, but that finishing had not been enough. She was not really reading. She was watching him move through his kitchen in the winter light, with the quiet competence he brought to everything, and she felt the weight of the moment, not its significance, not what it meant forward, but its actual present weight, the specific thing of being here, in this kitchen, with this man, holding this book he had given her, and she said it. "I love you," without announcement, in the same tone she used for all true things. He stopped chopping. He set down the knife. He turned around and looked at her across the small kitchen, and she looked back at him over the open book, and his face, the face she had been learning, moved, not with surprise, with something more settled than surprise, the expression of someone receiving something they have been carrying quietly on their own and are now allowed to put down. He crossed the kitchen. He stood at the table. He looked down at her. "I love you," he said, as simply as she had, as directly, as entirely true. She put the book down. He sat across from her. They looked at each other. "Good," she said. "Good," he said. Outside, January. The park 2 blocks away empty, the chess bench waiting for March, when the 2 old men would return as they always returned, reliable as the season itself. Marcus had mentioned this once with the fond, quiet tone of someone who looks forward to a thing's return without analyzing why. She was looking forward to March. She was looking forward to a great many things. Later, when she told this story, and she would tell it many times, because it had everything a true story needs, she always began at Rosalind's. At the moment she stopped at the table in her scrubs and gave a stranger a way out. "I was standing there in teal scrubs after a double shift," she would say, giving him every polite reason to say good night. Then the pause. And he stood up, and he pulled out my chair, and he said 5 words. She could never get through the 5 words without the thing behind her ribs rearranging itself, the same quiet rearrangement that had happened the first time, at the corner table with the candle throwing light in both directions, and a man across from her who had already decided she was worth staying for before she had sat down. "I still want this date." Marcus told it differently, shorter, without drama, the way he told all true things. He said he had been on the verge of becoming the kind of person who had made a quiet peace with not expecting anything new, not unhappy, just settled into shape. And then Claire, and then the corner table, and then the door opening at 7-Eleven. She crossed the restaurant, he would say, in the close of a day that had asked everything of her. She stopped at the table. She gave me a door, a pause. I didn't want the door. I wanted to know what happened next. What happened next was a February gallery, where Dana had mentioned an exhibition twice in 2 separate conversations without realizing she had mentioned it at all. Photographs taken inside hospitals. Not clinical photographs, but art. Images of the quiet things. Hands, windows, the particular light that exists in hospitals at 4 in the morning that is unlike any other light in the world. And Marcus had remembered both mentions and gotten 2 tickets and picked her up at 6. She stood in front of a large photograph of a nighttime hospital corridor and felt, in her body before she understood it in her mind, the specific quality of being understood somewhere she had not expected to be understood. "This is my hallway," she said quietly. "Not specifically, but this one. I know this light." "I know," he said, beside her. She turned. "How did you know about this exhibition?" "You mentioned it twice," he said, 2 weeks apart. "I didn't remember mentioning it twice." "I know," he said. She looked at him for a long moment in the warm gallery light. "You are not conditional," she said. She said it as a simple fact, which it was. "You showed up when I walked in wearing scrubs. You showed up on the roof. You showed up with Glenn Miller and the book that is genuinely the best, in December in the parked car. And here, with tickets to a hallway I mentioned in passing. She looked at him steadily. I see all of it. I want you to know that. He said nothing for a moment. I want you to know, she said, that I am not going to stop showing up either. He reached over and took her hand, not with ceremony, not with declaration, the way you take someone's hand when it is simply the right and obvious thing to do next. I know, he said. They stood in front of the photograph of the nighttime hallway, hand in hand, in the warm and quiet gallery. Around them, other people moved through other images. Outside, February finished its work. She had arrived in scrubs. She had been asked to stay anyway. She had stayed. And the staying had become, one Thursday at a time, one shared silence and borrowed book and fogged car window at a time, the thing she had not known she was building until it was already built, and she was already inside it, and it was. She understood now completely, and without reservation, exactly where she wanted to be. He had pulled out a chair. She had sat down. Everything else had followed. Not quickly. Not with any of the noise that stories sometimes use to make sure you have noticed them. It had followed quietly and steadily, and with the patience of two people who had both learned, through different years and different floors and different versions of loss, that the things worth having ask you to show up for them before you know what they are. They had both shown up. That was the whole of it, and it was enough, and it was everything. Outside, February. Inside, everything.